What's going on, guys? Jesse DeRozier with Hydrilla Gorilla Guide Service here on Lake Guntersville. Today I'm starting a new series entitled What's on the Deck. I'm going to feature each week what lures we use during our trips out on Lake Guntersville and show you exactly what we're using as well as what we expect to be using in the upcoming weeks. As the weather continues to change, a lot of the lures may change and some of them may stay the same. But without further ado, we'll start with what we did this week. So early in the mornings, the temperatures cool off during the night, and the shad have been in ditches adjacent to shallow flats. In the afternoon, those fish have been moving moving up onto those flats, up to the surface, and the fish have been schooling on those shad. So in the mornings, when they have moved out deep because of the cooler temperatures during the night, the easiest way to find those fish is to get on your electronics and grab around until you find bait balls. When you find bait balls and you find fish under the bait balls, an Alabama rig's been hard to beat. So the shad may be running in the water column from say 4 to 10 feet, and then directly underneath those, 3 or 4 feet below the bait balls, you'll have your bass that are set up basically feeding on those bait. So the Alabama rig's been a great tool to be able to get in amongst those feeding fish. Now a lot of times you'll get follows where they don't want to commit, and when that takes place, I found downsizing the bait even smaller tends to work well. But even on these, we're throwing small swim baits, keeping the profile small as fall time every year dictates. The smaller baits tend to prevail better over the larger baits. So as that happens, you'll have fish that are not wanting to commit to the Alabama rig, and what I follow up there is actually the old school Little George, or tail spinner, or a derrick hoop as a lot of the new guys will know it as. I fish a lot of old school baits. You'll see that in things that I present to you. A lot of them are old school lures. To me, the old school lures are no longer being thrown, and they present like a brand new lure that's just come out. These fish haven't seen it in such a long time. It works just the same. So the old school tail spinner can be worked directly underneath the school of bait, basically right in the face of these feeding bass, and just the old yo-yoing, just steady reel with a yo-yo, steady reel, yo-yo, steady reel, yo-yo, is probably the best presentation. So just that up and down action is what you're looking for, just that constant up and down. Those fish will typically hit it on the fall. As you lift it and you begin to drop your rod, watch your line for a tick. A lot of times you won't even feel it. You'll just pull back up and you'll actually feel the fish on there. But if you're watching your line, you'll see your line jump when the fish inhales the lure. The third way that I have been catching these fish underneath these schools of bait has just been a tail spinner. Keeping a small profile swim bait like a Kitech or something on the back of it. Something that you throw out, let it get all the way to the bottom. A lot of these fish won't be actively engaged with the bait fish. They'll be adjacent or nearby the bait fish, and until they get in the mood to actually feed, they'll just kind of keep near the area. But a small tail spin, basically, or underspin, ran down on the bottom. Throw it and let it crawl across the bottom. It's a presentation that's in their face, and it's a really easy opportunity for them to be able to feed, so they'll take advantage of it. The fourth lure on these same schools that I tend to throw is a deep diving jerk bait. The Mega Bass Vision 110+1 tends to fill the need in that regard. It gets down a little bit deeper. You can hit that 8 to 10 foot of water depending on the line size of what you're throwing, but it usually will get just below those bait balls, and that's right where you want to be. Any lure presentation that you're running on those bait balls needs to be basically at the bottom side of those schools of bait. Those fish typically are feeding below the bait at that time of day. So that fills the bill when it comes to that. As the day progresses and the fish tend to move, you can follow these same bait balls as they transition into shallower water. They'll either move onto a point, they'll move onto shallow grass flats, or to the back of a pocket. In any of those instances, there's a couple options, one of which is still a jerkbait. When they're blowing up on shad, an old school Smithwick Rattling Rogue, a little 4-inch chrome blue back is my go-to. That lure right there absolutely gets mauled when they're blowing up on fish. In 3 to 4 foot of water, this will still run. This will run 2 to 2.5 feet deep unless you weight it. It is hard to throw in the wind, and we get breezy conditions a lot in the fall. So a lot of guys choose to throw it on open faces. I still throw mine on a bait caster, but I throw it on a lighter action, like 6.5 foot jerkbait rod. And with a good throwing reel, you can still throw it even in the wind. You won't get as much distance as you will like the Mega Bass, where you have the weight transfer system. But that right there, the size of it is probably the key feature. But the Smithwick actually has a really good side-to-side action that these fish absolutely love. If they are in shallow grass that's too thick to throw a jerkbait, going with a super fluke. And even better than one super fluke is 2. So if you look closely, I have a 3-way swivel, one of which is missing a line on it. I actually had a fish take my second fluke. So a donkey rig actually is a very good way to entice these fish to eat, but a single fluke will do the same. On the donkey rig, I usually run a full-size fluke with a little heavier gauge hook, and then on the upper one, I run the smaller fluke with a lighter hook, or smaller out hook. In doing that, they'll separate in the water column. You'll have one that'll run just above the other, and it'll look like they're kind of chasing each other. And that right there in the grass can be a deadly combination. And you can a lot of times get hooked up with 2 at one time. As you hook one and that other one's just kind of tailing in behind the fish as you fight it, you'll have another chaser basically that will run up and grab the second one. So don't be surprised if you get doubles on the donkey rig. If they're blowing up on the surface, I go one of 2 ways. I either go really small or really big with a topwater bait. Again, going old school is the Bill Dance Spitting Image. It's a little 2.5-inch bait that the way it's balanced works really well. I mean, with light twitches, this thing will dance like crazy on the surface. And when they're blowing up, this represents the exact size bait of what they're hitting. And it's got a really nice rattle to it. And these fish absolutely will crush this bait. So the opposite side of the spectrum is to go really large. And for that, I like you can call it 3 different names, is the Vixen, a Teckle Nick Knocker, or Paycheck Baits, all of which were designed by the same person and are made exactly the same way, have the same rattles in them, have the same sound. Now that Reaction Innovations has come back out with the Vixen, you can get your hands on them. The problem is trying to still find the bone color. They are hard to find, so in certain areas. If that's the case, the Teckle Nick Knocker still has the bone available that you can get your hands on. But that full-size version is absolutely phenomenal. The other option that I went with, that's old school, and it actually outfished, believe it or not, outfished the Vixen, is the old Cotton Cordell topwater. It's also in a bone color. It's only a 2-hook bait, which I prefer 3 if I can get away with it. But the key is with these big topwater walking baits, they hit typically the middle hook. So where this is positioned at, the fish are still getting the hook. I have not had an issue with mishooks on this bait. But this actually outfished the other day the Vixen hands down. The client in the back of the boat absolutely wore myself and his partner out while he was throwing this, and I actually had the Vixen in my hand and got outfished with this old school bait. The rattle in it sounds really good and the fish love it. But that, if you have one, pull it out. If you don't, you might find one on eBay somewhere. But that's awesome bait. Check them out. If you like the Teckle, the Nick Knocker, so here's the full size, and then they also have a pup. So if they're keying on that small bait and won't eat the big one, you can still get your hands on the bone version of the same lure in a pup. So that's your schooling fish on bait. So out deep and then up shallow. Second way of catching them this year has been running shallow grass flats. And I like probably doing that better than chasing the schoolers. Schoolers will get you some numbers, but until the weather gets fairly cold, the bigger fish don't tend to show up. So that being the case, I like running the shallow grass flats where I can get those better quality fish. That 4 to 6 foot of water, good thick grass, not necessarily like mats, but close to the surface, and clumpy. I like coontail, hydrilla, milfoil, sago, pondweed, you name it. If it's clumped right and it's on an area of hard bottom, you can get right in a hurry. So to attack that, I go with a Producer swim baits, 3.5 inch, and a blue minnow, and I pair it on a flashy swimmer with a silver willow leaf, and that's a 1/4 ounce weight. That can be thrown directly through these grass clumps. There's a technique for doing that I'll talk about here in just a second with the next lure, but making contact with the grass is definitely going to be a key feature. So the second lure to do that is a swim jig. And this is what I was talking about, making contact with the grass. So everybody around here knows of the Alabama shake. On Lake Guntersville, I don't typically do the Alabama shake. I do it on other lakes, the Coosa River and whatnot. But on a grass lake, the key to catching these fish is making contact with that grass. Otherwise, the fish a lot of times don't know that you're there unless the fish are positioned above the grass. And right now, these fish on these grass flats, a lot of them are tucked in underneath the grass. Taking that as you would a lipless in the spring or a chatterbait, throw it out, nice steady reel, and when you tick the grass, giving it a pump through the grass. When it comes up and over that grass, it starts to die a little bit on the other side. Those fish come out looking for it and actually eat it. So when you're up high and you're doing that Alabama shake, the pulse waves coming off of that lure go down and hit the tops of the grass, and it kind of deadens. So it's hard for those fish down below the grass to actually sense that your lure's there. But if you make contact with that grass and actually send that vibration down the stalk of the grass, that's when they come out looking for your lure and actually eat it. So that's what makes the difference in the presentation with the flashy swimmer, the swim jig, as well as the next one, which is a chatterbait. Right here, I'm actually throwing a homemade chatterbait that I made myself, and I've got it paired with, again, the Producer swim baits, 3.5, and that blue minnow. Just a shad pattern, same deal, throwing it out, ticking that grass. So the deal with this is you can't work it obviously in as thick a grass as you can the swim bait on the flashy swimmer as well as the swim jig. So this one has to be a little bit sparser on the grass to be able to work it efficiently without constantly getting hung in the grass. So last but not least is actually fishing grass clumps this time of year. You've got lily pads as well as matted hydrilla or coontail or milfoil, whatever the situation might be. Each creek has a different type of grass typically that prevails in that specific area. So depending on what you have, will kind of dictate what you throw. If I'm on lily pads, I found something this year that worked better than any other option in the lily pads, and I was extremely surprised because, quite frankly, it's an ugly lure. It's made by Gambler, and I'm not a huge Gambler fan, but this has kind of changed my mind regarding at least this specific lure. It's their swimming frog, and it's not the prettiest thing in the world, but I paired it on a rivet 2-hook weighted hook, and I powder coat the weight on the hook myself, just to make it match the bait. But taking that and throwing it in around the lily pads was phenomenal this year. The reason why is it actually grabs the lily pads. So when you go to crawl it over the lily pads, the material that this is made out of, when you feel it, it's got a very tacky texture to it, and it grabs the lily pads, and it will like hit 3 or 4 times on that lily pad and shake that lily pad as you crawl across it. It's like going across the top of that lily pad. You'll see that actual lily pad shake. I had one fish completely blow up through the lily pad and just demolish the lily pad trying to get to it. If you catch the edge of the lily pad, it will spin the lily pad in a circle. That's how much grab that it actually has against the lily pads. It will completely spin it around. So if you're fishing the lily pads, and they are dying back fairly quickly, so I don't know how much longer this is going to continue to work, but it is working as of right now. If you've got some of the lily pads that are still green, as well as mixed in with some of the dying ones, that right there is definitely the way to go. If you're on matted grass, the hydrilla, milfoil, coontail, the old hollow belly frog, that's a spro frog that I was throwing the other day, and I've taken and added weight to it. And how I did that is I take BBs, and right there where the hook hole is, take the BBs and push them through one by one. Typically I add about 3 just to give it a little bit of rattle as well as a little bit of weight, but this one has been made up to be able to fish the cheese, the slop, where the fish aren't actually seeing the bait, but they're feeling it. By adding the extra weight, it actually presses down through the mat harder and allows for them to feel it and actually aim for it. And then when they do blow up on it, because of the added weight, when the fish comes up, it doesn't fly out of the way as easily as one that doesn't have the weight added to it. Now granted, it will sink if I throw it in open water, and it will fill up with water a little bit faster. Again, typically I don't worry too much about the water filling up in my frog. And the reason for that is again, it adds weight. When I'm working those mats and I'm trying to get it to press into the mat, that water in there doesn't bother me. When you set the hook, it will squeeze out. It squeezes out fairly easy, just like when you take your finger into it. It'll do the same when you set the hook on the fish. So don't be afraid of throwing it with a little water in it. As well as when you throw it, a lot of it will get slung out just in the process of throwing it. Last but not least is punching. Take 1.25 ounce weight and a black and blue beaver style bait, doesn't matter what brand, but taking it and physically punching that grass. If you've worked through an area with that frog and you say you got 2-3 blow-ups, you need to turn around and you need to go back and punch that same area. I promise you there's way more fish there than what you realize, and by going back and punching it, you can clean house whole lot more efficiently with this than you can the frog. Frog's fun and great seeing them blow up on it and everything, but if you really want to catch some good quality fish, you need to be punching in the fall. But that's been my deal this week, depending on where I'm at and what type of cover that I'm fishing. And things this coming week are not going to change a whole lot. So I looked at the weather before doing this, and it looks as though the night temperatures are going to be like 57 to 64 as the low, and then like 68 to 75, 76 in the afternoons. So not a big swing in the overall temperatures. And that being the case, though, overall water temperatures are not going to drop very much. If they do, they're going to crawl down until we get another big cold front. I'm looking forward to that happening, because when that happens, a lot will change very quickly. Your bigger fish will start to show up on these schooling fish. You're going to start seeing more and more gizzard shads up in the shallows, which will help bring those bigger fish in. And then you're going to see some changing of some of the lures that I'll be using. As we get into colder temperatures, there's two that I'll go ahead and show you that will be starting to become active. One of which you can actually use right now with the schooling fish, and that is the old-fashioned jig and spoon. It will throw a country mile. So you can see some fish schooling, a long distance off without running up on top of them with your trolling motor and spooking those fish and making them go down. Take that, throw to the far side of the school if you can, pop it one time and let it fall for 2 to 3 seconds. It'll get below the school of fish and then start yo-yoing it. And as you yo-yo it, as it starts to fall on the next yo-yo is usually when they're going to hit it. That makes a big difference in catching quality fish instead of the small schoolers that are on the surface. A lot of times what ends up happening is those little ones are the ones up there actually knocking the bait around, and the bigger fish are sitting underneath, and they eat the injured shad that the small ones have knocked around as they come fluttering down. And they just swim around and just scoop them up. They're not having to put forth the effort actually going in and actually chasing the bait. They burn off a lot of energy in doing that, and they're not looking to burn any energy. So that flutter spoon getting below the school actually is a really good option. As the water gets colder and these fish start relating to the bottom, taking another metal bait, a blade bait, and actually yo-yoing it like the Little George, except actually down on the bottom, yo-yoing it across the bottom. That too will start to come into play as these water temps continue to drop. Unfortunately, that won't be this week, based on what the temps are showing. But hopefully that gives you guys some information if you're going out on the water this week. That'll help you to be able to get out and kind of dial in your style of fishing, whether it's punching grass, running grass flats, or chasing bait balls. Also too is the guys that like chasing bait balls, scoping's not a bad way to go. I personally don't do it, but there's been a lot of big bags that have been caught on Lake Guntersville lately by guys going out scoping. So hopefully this helps you guys, and until next week, that's what's on the deck. Y'all have a good day.